Hello, and thanks for having me. What we're going to talk about today is some of the challenges that virtual reality has. You have wireless, you have wired, and so on. And we think that there's a distance issue with virtual reality, and you can kind of see that as we go through the presentation, some of the things that we think are possible and what we've accomplished. So the first thing is people say is virtual reality is dangerous. In this particular case, the sound isn't up, but you have someone who's watching virtual reality. She's experiencing dinosaurs that are coming at her, and then she just hits her brother because she, again, is so immersed. She's so immersed in that reality that you begin to forget that you're actually tethered. And in the current case of virtual reality, the fact is that in order to get the maximum game experience, you need to be tethered. And that's because the bandwidth that I'll show you in a little bit is just continues to exceed what is currently capable. So we'll talk a little bit about HDBaseT and then some of the virtual reality solutions, some of the things that are currently working out there with HDBaseT. And then we'll talk about what we believe a VR chip would actually kind of look like. So in this case, these are all the different cables that actually can be combined over a single Category 6 cable, and it can be sent over 100 meters. So you have your typical HDMI, you have your Ethernet, and so on. And all of this is uncompressed, which is the key, especially with virtual reality. Uncompressed, and in total, the latency is about 6 microseconds. And that is over the course of 100 meters. Obviously, virtual reality doesn't need 100 meters. Virtual reality needs about 15 to work just perfectly. So our chip is on the left-hand side. Someone who creates a source. In this particular case, you can see it's a media player, but you can change out to an HMD and a heartbeat. We're able to send both the audio, video, again uncompressed, Ethernet. We're able to send power, controls, and USB. Again, all of this 100 meters. When it comes to the technology itself, we obviously feel like the cables that are attached to the virtual reality headset are thick, they're ugly, and it makes no sense. So we'll talk about that in a few slides. The HDBaseT Alliance is formed of 5 major companies. They're notables: Sony, LG, Samsung, Valens, who I work for as a sales director, and General Motors. Among all of the companies, though, are all the ones you see here. So there's a little less than 200. They are the who's who of the professional audio-video space. Some of them are very familiar to you, probably in consumer electronics. So all of these folks either create HDBaseT products using the chipset, or they believe that HDBaseT is pivotal in their industry, and so they want to make sure that they are staying on top of it. So getting back to it, you take everything that virtual reality needs, left eye, right eye, both 1080p, the audio, the controls, and so on, and you have to shove that all into a single wire, and that's actually preferred. And again, the solutions today just don't do that, with the exception of actually Oculus has changed, and Vive is moving to one wire, but still very thick. So this is the first kind of hackathon that we did with the Vive. We showed it at our booth. Both the Vive and the Sony PlayStation. And as you can see, we're taking the single Category 6 cable. You can see how small it is, 3 millimeters. It's a 30 gauge wire. And we're able to send HDMI, audio, and power, by the way. So we're powering the headset. There's no additional cable for power. And we're also able to send the HDMI uncompressed video. That's what you currently get, or at least you did when we made this PowerPoint. You can see it's way too thick. It's cumbersome on the head, and most folks that came by and saw the other solution that we were showing immediately just said it's much lighter and much more comfortable to actually be on your person. So your typical room setup, what you see there is a 10-meter length cable. That's exactly what we showed here at the show. And again, you can extend that out as far as you want. The reason that we actually believe that it needs to be longer is most folks have their PlayStation or their PC in locations that aren't perfect for virtual reality. In the case of the playing space for these virtual reality headsets that allow you to roam, they're calling out for a 9-foot by 7-foot section for you to actually maneuver and roam. So that doesn't leave you much space. Considering that it's a 5-meter cable is what you're typically getting, it does not leave you much space to be able to tie it to a computer that's typically behind a cabinet, and then you have to wheel it through the cabinet and perhaps around a couch or under a chair to make sure that you have the optimum space. Most folks don't have houses that are free-flowing and you can set a computer wherever you want. That's just not reality. Let's see. Oh, I went backwards. Excuse me. So in the case of Sony, a little bit more tactically challenging, but what we did is, this is the typical Sony setup. Still, they have long cables. None of them reach over 5 meters. But in this particular case, you run into a distance situation where you're tethered. And you can see where the headset is and that small little dongle that they attach to. So what we did is we just cut into that. We took a Home Depot cable along with our technology, and we were able to then extend that by 10 meters. Again, offering you a solution that allows you to sit at your leisure or stand at your leisure and in the optimal space and enjoy virtual reality the way we actually believe it should be enjoyed. Typical setup, again, this just shows the real world pictures. You can see the PCBs are actually quite large, and they don't need to be that large. This was kind of a hack job on our side just to prove that we could actually do it. But there are companies that are manufacturing smaller dongles that would be, and also much more appeasing to the eye. So you can see the extensions there. Again, separated the headset completely from the Sony PlayStation, and actually inside of our booth we had the Sony PlayStation in a location that would be really typical of a standard home. But if you had to play virtual reality on this, on a standard PlayStation, you'd realize that the cords themselves are very cumbersome. This just shows you exactly what we're actually doing. So we're sending the USB, the HDMI, and 12 volt. Let's remind ourselves that we are actually powering the Sony headset. And we're sending that all over a cable that you can buy at Home Depot at lengths up to 100 meters and send it over. Now, we realize, again, 100 meters is too long. You have sensors that you have to contend with. But going back to it, we think about 15 meters is the optimal spot. So currently today, there are folks that have internet cafes, and this is the typical setup of an internet cafe where the PC is next to every single user. And in this case, it's, the reason that they have it is because of the cable length limitation of HDMI. So when you start to include HDBaseT, what you find is you can home run all of your servers into one location. You can then run category 6 cable out to the different users, and you find yourself getting rid of all the multiple cables. You find yourself now enabling 4K. As you can tell in this particular slide, there's too many cables, and you're limited in your distance. And that's what it looks like, nice and clean. So you have one cable that's going to each of the PCs. Again, all your servers are home run somewhere safe, somewhere where they cannot be compromised. And we're supporting the 4K 44430 format. You can obviously increase the frames per second just by manipulating the color space. Part of the ecosystem of HDBaseT includes companies who build wall plates. So it doesn't have to be an ugly solution. There are plenty of companies that manufacture and use HDBaseT chipsets, and they've created wall plates, they've created audio-video receivers, switches, so it's an ecosystem that is already very much mature. So VR solutions, this is what we currently look like. We have 2 different chipsets inside of the family, and then we obviously have a roadmap that looks quite cool. Automotive, we've actually been able to engage with Daimler Chrysler. In our automotive side, we sent a press release out about that. Automotive is very interesting, are very interested in HDBaseT because we are now removing a lot of the heavy cables that are inside of the vehicles. It's a third of the weight of a vehicle are cables. So now you can imagine you can send all that data over a single wire. Again, going back to virtual reality, you have all those heavy cables. Why not send it through a 30 gauge lightweight cable? So in 2021, the chief scientists of Oculus basically said that they're going to move towards a 4K by 4K, which is, it seems unrealistic. But if you were at our booth today, you'd realize that there were a lot of folks that came and they said, hey, when are you just going to go wireless? Everything wireless. But most of us know that that just isn't possible, that wireless and wired will actually coexist for eternity. And that's because of the insatiable need for bandwidth. The content providers want to make larger worlds. They want to make more advanced worlds where the textures are what you would normally see in real life. And you can't do that if you're trying to display this on a wireless display. Well, you can, but maybe the battery lasts for about 38 seconds, and then you no longer can experience it. But in the case of a wired world, then that is entirely possible. And the reason for that is because at some point, the bandwidth limitations even go beyond what HDMI 2.1 is. So in this particular chart, you can see that by the time we hit 2021, he's kind of right. We think it's a little bit pushed in, but you can tell that at some point you run out of space for virtual reality as far as bandwidth is concerned. So we believe that the sooner that chip manufacturers find a solution to this problem, the better. Because virtual reality won't slow down, they're going to continue to advance, but if they will absolutely hit some sort of mark where they can't. So the different options for video, you're looking at a typical scenario where you're trying to shove 32 gigs across the pipe. And what's interesting is when you begin to add different feature functions to it, you realize that HDBaseT and the technology allows more functionality. So for instance, it's simple to add DP/IP into the chipset. It's simple to add a DP to DSI or even a CSI. In the case of the lower option, you see that there's a DSC compression. That chip, the DSC solution is actually in DP 1.4, so the compression is actually already inside of that standard. You begin to use DSC with the chipset, and you find yourselves now pushing close to 64 gigs. If you're doing, and that's if you're doing 2-to-1, so virtually lossless compression. And then visually lossless compression. And then when you look at even 3-to-1, you can see how your ability to transport high bandwidth video over the course of, again, a Home Depot cable becomes a reality. And so virtual reality manufacturers, the HMDs, developers, and content providers now won't see that ceiling. They'll actually have, they'll feel a bit more freedom to be able to explore. On the graphics card integration, you can see where having some sort of transport system, be it HDBaseT or something else, integrated would then allow it to coexist with Type-C. It would allow it to go to different types of displays that use Type-C. So you can see how there would be value in that. And there will also be a direct connection to the PC itself. So our core competence has already been established. The HDBaseT Alliance has been around since 2010, so we've done a few things over the course of the years. Our space is in digital transport, video transport, and we think that virtual reality, if you just extend out that space a little further, would be a good thing. So, last slide. questions? Great. Thank you very much.